Our theme today is how to make supply chain sustainable and transparent. And I'm here with Jamie Barsimantov, who is Chief Strategy Officer of SupplyShift. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now tell me, how can supply chains become both sustainable and transparent? Do the two things go hand in hand? How does that work?
It's a great question because sometimes people think that transparency means sustainability and some people think that sustainability means transparency, and they're actually different things. Transparency is knowing your suppliers and knowing your supply chain, and sustainability is how they're doing on the various aspects of ESG, environmental, social, deforestation, plastic. So there's a lot to it, but it starts with getting to know your suppliers, understanding what's important to your company as far as sustainability and transparency, and then doing the hard work of asking your suppliers the right questions, tracking their performance, creating carrots and sticks in the procurement process to support them in that journey so they meet your expectations, and also being willing to make the hard choices when you find things that are against the values of your company or potentially against the law.
Right, what kind of hard choices are we talking about?
Well, we do have customers who say that, if suppliers are doing certain things, I won't work with them anymore.
Right.
Forced labor, human rights issues tend to be a red line. Greenhouse gases tends to be much softer, right? It's a huge issue. Climate change is, probably the most important issue facing our time. But companies, and I understand why, aren't willing to say, hey, I won't work with a supplier if they're not willing to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. That makes sense.
Right.
But there are ways to create incentives. There are ways to support that transition. I think it starts with education. I think it starts with helping them understand why it's important, what's expected. And then, we see companies doing all kinds of things, writing into contracts certain expectations to have science-based greenhouse gas targets. Also, financial incentives related to supply chain finance, related to green loans. We work with a number of banks who provide green loans and allow that to come through based on sustainability performance.
What is a green loan?
Sure. So there are actually many types of financing solutions that can be used to support sustainability. But in this case, I'm talking about based on the performance of a supplier on the issues that are important. Could be water conservation, could be greenhouse gas reductions. If they reach a certain level of performance, then they have access to a lower cost of finance.
Wow.
So
that's a pretty good carrot.
Right, exactly. Right. And it actually doesn't cost the company anything. Because
that's fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
So talking about education, I think we're seeing a much more educated consumer these days. How are things changing in terms of consumer demands for greater sustainability, greater transparency about sustainability? What do you see going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a trend that's been going for more than 5 years, maybe 10 years. As the younger generation gets older, they demand more out of the products they buy. They don't want to just buy something, they want to know where it came from, they want to know it's good for their bodies, good for the planet. But actually, I think in the last few years, it's been more investor pressure that is driving companies to act even more than consumer pressure. I think consumer pressure works for consumer-facing brands, and it drives them to act. For non-consumer-facing brands, sometimes it's their customers, right, who then are consumer-facing brands who are asking them, hey, I need to sell a certain kind of product, which means I need something from you that's a little bit different. So that can pressure companies further upstream, but also investors. Investors, I think, are the driving force these days, pushing companies to disclose, to improve. And so that's driven companies in the pharmaceutical sector, in the chemical sector, to really take ESG and transparency much more seriously.
Right, so that's really where transparency and sustainability and ESG meet.
Right.
That's fascinating. So what are some of the opportunities and challenges related to introducing supply chain sustainability?
Yeah. Wow, I can talk about this for a long time. There's lots of challenges, and there are opportunities. I mean, I think the first challenge is internal to the company, to really align on what the company's goals are, what they want to achieve and why, and even then to have alignment within the business on how that's going to be accomplished. We have a lot of companies we work with who still don't have the right processes and buy-in across procurement and finance in order to do the things that they really said they're going to do. So I think the first challenge is an internal one, to really fund the thing that they say they're going to do.
Walk the talk.
Exactly, right.
Because I think we've seen a lot of what's called greenwashing over the last decade or so, and now it seems to me that there's a shift where people are going, okay, show me your metrics, show me your results. This is scientifically measurable. How are you actually doing this?
And that leads to the other challenge, which is then engaging suppliers, right? Once you decide you're going to do something, and this is why we do what we do, is poor suppliers are asked by company A a certain set of information, a certain topic, how to measure something scientifically.
Right.
Company B comes along, asks the same supplier for kind of something similar, something
Right.
different. Company C does the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So this leads to not a great ability for the supplier to know what they're supposed to do.
Right, because it's not their core competency
Exactly.
necessarily,
Yep.
but they need to learn how to bake it in
Right.
and talk about
Yep.
it, I guess.
How they're doing compared to their peers,
Yeah.
why they should improve, what to improve. If they have a consistent message,
Yeah.
then that can really help them
Of
understand
course.
what they're supposed to do.
Sure, that's really interesting. I think there's been a lot of talk at this conference and more recent ones as well about how important it is to be going down several tiers into the supplier network. So that sounds like a very important aspect of it.
Definitely.
So tell me, what do you see in terms of future? Where are we going with sustainability? Is it going to become more real? Is it
Yes.
just a very hard road to travel?
Yes and yes.
Right.
It will take time. I think we're still in the infancy. I mean, we've been doing this for 10 years, and
Right.
the change we've seen in the last 3 years is dramatic. Yet I don't think any company is, more than a third of the way on their journey to a really
Right.
sustainable, transparent supply chain.
Right. Wow.
So there is a lot to do. I think companies are, and rightly so, not willing to show what they found in their supply chains to the consumers yet.
Right. Yeah,
maybe
sure.
in bits, maybe certifications, little things here and there, but
Right.
they need to clean up their supply chain first before they're going to show the world what's going
Interesting.
on. So I think there's a process of, even tier one, even really having tier one aligns is a challenge for a lot of companies.
Sure.
Upstream, that takes time, that takes effort.
Yeah.
And there are benefits to doing so. And once that's all
Sure.
clear and clean, then you'll have much more transparency going to
Right.
the consumer. And I think that's about 10 years away. But,
Wow,
but there's a
okay.
lot of work to be done in the meantime.
Well,
And,
that's
and
hopeful.
value to be had and businesses to grow based on doing the right thing in the meantime.
Great, super. So tell me a little bit about what SupplyShift does
Sure,
to
yeah.
facilitate transparency and sustainability.
Sure. So supply chain was built to solve that challenge of companies needing transparency in their supply chains, and also the challenge of companies asking their suppliers over and over again for different kinds of information.
Right.
So it's a data network that allows companies to ask their suppliers for different sets of information of the core topics of sustainability that are the biggest challenges of our time, and for suppliers to answer once, answer to customer A, customer B comes along, they can share that with customer B. So it takes the pressure off the suppliers, takes the pressure off the buyers to know what to ask.
Right.
And also helps the supplier know where they stand, right?
Right.
So they have this kind of trackable, benchmarkable performance data where it creates a two-way street where buyers and suppliers can really communicate. And then the ability to replicate that down the tiers.
Right.
Okay, so hey, tier one supplier, now please disclose who's behind you, and
Right.
please send these questions to them, and so that creates that transparent supply
All right,
chain.
so you have a set of metrics and questions that a supplier needs to look into, and that do you give them like a rating, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, so actually we have 25 sets of standard questions that cover things from plastics to cotton to greenhouse gases to labor. For different industries, different things are important and different ways of measuring. And then we also have customers that say, hey, we want to change things, make it our own. We actually buy carpets, and you don't have a carpet assessment. So,
Right.
so customization of what's asked is also really important, because transparency and sustainability is evolving, and our understanding of the impacts is evolving. So that customization actually leads to innovation. So we
Great.
actually allow that within the platform as well.
So final question, it sounds like you're getting kind of deep into suppliers' business, and
Yep.
they have to really give you a lot of information about exactly how they conduct their business. Is that a challenge too, to build that trust with them? And
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts with asking the right questions. So if you ask too many questions that are too complicated,
Right.
suppliers are going to say, look, I can't do this, sorry, it's too much. And they'll make excuses, right?
Sure.
If you right size what you're asking for, and if you have 10 companies asking for the same thing, then you get, and if the supplier gets some value out of it, right?
Yeah.
They learn something, they understand what they're supposed to do, they see how they compare to their peers, then you provide them some value.
Right.
And we've learned that, especially when you're mapping upstream, no response is actually important information, because if you're trying to
Right.
understand if you're sourcing from Xinjiang, China to comply with the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, and your
Yeah.
supplier won't tell you where they source from,
Yeah.
you can be pretty sure that you don't want to buy from them,
Right.
or you can pretty sure you know where they're sourcing from, right? Even without them telling you. So
Sure,
so that
sure,
so
that's
you have to
fascinating.
yeah. So getting the intelligence out of what comes back is something that happens on many levels.
Wonderful, and these demands from manufacturers and retailers are only going to increase,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, you've got your work cut out for you
Oh,
then.
yes.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Great.
Cheers.
Great talking to you.
I've been speaking with Jamie Barsimantov from SupplyShift. Thank you for watching.